Welcome back. Thank you if you are watching again, and the first two didn't bore you so much you haven't bothered to watch another one. In this part three, I wanted to look at watercraft, for want of a better phrase. It's a very difficult thing to take my hand off the camera, Nick. It's a very difficult thing to, I don't want to say teach, sounds cocky, to impart, and it's something that you get with like most things in fishing and life in general. With experience, you learn by doing. It's all very well me saying look for that, look for this, look for that, but if you can't, if you're not waterside, and obviously I get opportunities all day every day really, between the two lakes to watch fish and learn, then it's hard, but to sort of talk about it and teach it. But I wanted to try and show you sort of like a bird's eye view of what I'm looking at, I guess. It might be difficult, sun's up now, but this is very typical of loads of lakes I fish back in the UK, especially in Essex, the sort of the club waters and the little syndicates and stuff like that. So it's not purely relevant to fishing in France in any way. It's about smaller waters and what I'm looking for. So I know it's not overly professional to do it as a selfie, but I really think it's possibly the best way of sort of looking what I'm looking for and what I'm looking at. So I just thought I'd have a little stroll, holding the camera but facing away from my ugly mug, and sort of trying to pick out some stuff that I'm looking at, that I'm noticing, in an attempt to try and show you the sort of things I think you should look for, and the sort of things I definitely look for when it comes to especially arriving on that Saturday. So there's the first one. So this is where everyone will pull up at Solace, the cabin, etc. And this is everyone's, or 99% of everyone's, first view of the lake. So straight away you get the impression that there's a bit of weed about, but nothing drastic. You can sort of tell that because the weed band is through here and in front of here, and there's a little bit out there, but when you look in that direction towards, in our case, Wallace's, you can see that there's very little to no weed, certainly not up on the surface. So straight away I'm thinking that that's probably the deeper, siltier area. Obviously I know that, but from your point of view, weed needs light to grow. We dye ours blue, not mega blue, but blue enough, which obviously means that it's even less likely to grow in that deeper water. Now this is a really shallow lake. If you're coming somewhere like this, you'll have had that information. On average it's 4.5 foot, but as you can see, with no weed in that area, you won't see it, but there is a few patches just under the surface, sort of between this big bulky bit and the bit out in the middle there that you can see. But as you'll walk around, Polaroids on, you'll notice that there isn't any weed growing. So as I'm standing looking, we'll try and do what I had in my head. So if you've got this weed in close in the bottom left hand corner, and you've got that weed out in the middle, this isn't obviously weed, what you can see. This is algae, filamentous algae. You can see it a bit better down here. So in most cases, it will show you where the weed is, because it's got caught in the weed and isn't getting moved around by the wind. So you can almost guarantee that where you've got situations like that with algae stuck on the surface, that there's weed to the surface, which is what's pinning it in place. So you can see the wind, obviously very little ripple, is coming in just to our right. So that is an easterly, which is very odd for this time of year, very rare, but this has been a very odd summer. So I'm just going to have a little walk around and see if I can spot anything. I mean, this could be a total waste of time because I might not spot anything, and then you know, this video won't achieve what we're aiming for. But I'm sort of doing what 99% of anglers will do when they arrive, either with me or as a group on their own. So this is sort of interesting. It's something that never gets fished. So the whole margin of the lake, as you'll notice as we walk around, has got what I call frog lily. There's probably a professional name, but it's the little mini lilies that don't actually root. They sort of are suspended, and then they sort of bind themselves together and make little rafts. So although they're full of this sort of filamentous algae as well, they are making a raft which comes out probably 8 foot from the margin all the way around, giving loads of shade to the fish, loads of cover, and loads of potential sort of sneaky spots that they can sort of navigate their way around the lake. So like here, for example, so you can see here, I haven't seen the fish, but there's a ripple. That is definitely not the wind, because it was bigger and less, the waves were further apart, if you know what I mean, than the wind, which is sort of a, you know, up down little sort of peaks and troughs. So straight away I'm thinking, definitely, just from me talking quietly to this camera, I've spooked something that was in this weed. The ripple obviously coming towards me as it was, which has now stopped, would suggest that definitely the fish I spooked was on this side of the weed, in close. So just to give you an idea, that patch of weed there where that ripple came from is probably only 12-15 yards, and then there's bits of weed, as you can see, between me and that. But you know, straight away I'm thinking, right, so that fish was definitely this side of the weed, or in that short piece of weed, short patch of weed. So I don't want to be fishing over him if I go in here. I don't want to be going in that lovely little channel in between necessarily, just because it looks so good, because you know, there's clearly an opportunity in close, and I'd much rather catch them in close with less line through the weed, less disturbance, than I would you know, fishing out and over the top of it all. So there's something to bear in mind that I've sort of clocked, and obviously you can see the weed a bit clearer. You can start to see the holes in an awful lot of places where you can see gaps in the weed. You can I wouldn't say 9 times out of 10, but 7-8 times out of 10 you can be fairly confident there's nothing underneath it, you know, especially this time of year. If the weed, oh my word. Well, there we go. That was lucky. So that was a big common. It wasn't zoomed in, unfortunately, so I didn't get it clear as day. But right, so that one's on the back of the weed. Perhaps that was the one I spooked and he's moved through the weed, but very, very close to the back of this this weed bed here, which sort of goes to about this point here. So, you know, that's definitely, you know, that's obviously a jigsaw piece in place. If you listen to that as well, that's one of my favourite noises. That noise is a coot or a moorhen, bird life, and that call is an alarm call. Now this time of day, you're very unlikely for it to be a predator, you know, like a fox or something like that. So the chances are that, I'm saying that though, believe it or not, that is a predator. There is a cat down there, very pretty looking cat. But that is what that call was telling me. There was something here, there was a predator, that's possibly a wildcat, in the margins. But a lot of times, especially this time of day, I mean that one is the exception to the rule, but at this time of day, if you hear noises like that, it's very possible that there's something underneath the coot or the moorhen that spooked it and gives you that cry, that alarm call. So that alarm call is definitely something to pay attention to. Where is the bird? Did you hear the fish? If not, it would suggest the fish is below the surface, didn't crash, but did spook the bird. So this is inflow on our lake. It's quite a shallow little corner, normally very weedy, but this year not. So I'm going to be quiet in here as I walk in. So when you're strolling around, come in here nice and quiet. Because if they're here, they'll probably be fairly close. And this is a prime example. So you've got this raft coming, well, all the way around, as you can see. I often see fish just appear from underneath it and move out the bay or this corner into the main part of the lake. So if they're using this area under, this raft in this corner, why wouldn't they use it the whole way around? And as a lot of times people neglect. You look at this margin here. So this margin is maybe 60-70 yards long between the swim I've just left and this one. And very, very rarely gets fished. So places like that are well worth, because if you look down here, for example, you've got weed here, the raft going all the way down that margin. There's a real nice channel there. So even if I don't want to fish that, when I'm set up in this swim, it's definitely somewhere I would probably trickle a bit of bait in and keep my eye on. A lot of the time they'll move in underneath the rods, especially on these smaller waters. They know the lines are going out to the middle, out to these likely looking areas. Here you go. So that there, for example, a lot of people might think that was a carp. I'm 99% sure that was a pike. It was a far more difficult sometimes to describe it, but it was a more jaggedy noise. Like the noise was clearly not left the water; it was in the surface layers of the water, which would suggest like pike smashing into shoalfish, into fry. So that's probably what that was. But obviously I'm doing this as quickly as I can. We're giving as much information as I can, but without boring the crap out of you. I would obviously stand in a corner like this for much longer and watch them, because they'll very likely ghost in or out, depending whether they are. There's a little bit of weed in this corner, but most of it's clear. But even this is something to bear in mind. So this has got a name, this stuff, which I can't remember. But basically these little rafts that you can see here, they are the bottom. They're like a crust that forms on the bottom, and if you fish estate lakes in particular, you'll often see a lot of this in the spring, where it's almost like the silt's been dormant, the anaerobic activity, the word is, has sort of died off to virtually nothing in the coldest months. When the sun hits it and things start happening, nature starts breaking it down again, and gases start being released, and naturals start working in the base layer like that. You often get this crust come up. The fact that it's come up now, and it's sort of not on the wind either. It's a bit down here, and there's a little bit. It's not a huge amount, but I would suggest that that is because something like, right on cue, a fish is either bubbling, feeding on something, or you could just make that out there, I think, or they've been flanking maybe on an area and they've disturbed that crust, and with the sun coming out, it's floated up to the surface and drifted around. So that's a sign. You'll get similar with weed, where this lake's got a fair bit of weed in it. When you find freshly sort of like it's been ripped up, and you find it on the windward end, even if the weed's nowhere near you, you can take that as a sign that fish have been ripping up the weed. There might have been a hatch, might be a huge snail hatch or something like that. And it just gives you another little jigsaw. You might be fishing open water, for example, with no weed. You wake up one morning, wind's blowing into your face, and there's a load of weed in your margin, freshly cut, still green. You can almost guarantee that will be fish. that have churned that up in the night. So it might be worth, or it would be worth in that case then, investigating further the weedier areas, trying to find out some murkier water, or if you can even see where there was weed one day and there isn't the next. You know, sometimes it can be mega obvious. Sometimes it takes a bit more investigation. Sometimes you'll never work it out. You know, you can't see, but it's always worth putting that in the memory bank and seeing if you can find where things like that have come from. So walking down what we call the back bank here into one of the swims. So in this swim, obviously, you can tell that there's a lot less weed. Obviously there's some down here, but this area out here is weed free. But it also interestingly gives you an angle to the weed where we saw that fish show. So that common showed about here, sort of directly in between the two swims. So that's where I was standing when it showed. And it obviously gives you a different angle into the back of the weed. So I mean, in our case, the swims are comfortable, but even, you know, if you started seeing regular activity out there in open water and you're in that swim over there where you can just see the white bench, I would much rather fish it from here. So I haven't got my line lay going across the top of the weed and through the weed. One, I think it's really obvious. They pick it up a lot easier. Two, your bite indication's rubbish. Three, you're pulling fish back through weed, which you never ideally want to do if you don't have to. So if I saw that regularly out there, what we saw earlier, plus we saw this bubbling, this was a swim we were in just behind that bush. That's where we walked from around here. So we saw that bubbling out here. So I'm straight away thinking, right, well, that's 2 rods sorted. I've got an area that I've seen fish feeding down to my left. I've got an area straight out in front of me where I've watched a good fish roll. I know because of that ripple when we first got here that I spooked something in that weed. And it'd be very difficult to pick this up on camera, but there is also, there we go, you can see this just there. It won't be gin clear this, but there's some micro bubbles coming up there rather than the big sexy fizz that you often see, that you love to see. There's some more just to the right there. So even that is a clue to me. So I kind of know straight away that if I know there's something going on down there. There's fish doing something down there, flanking or feeding. If that was silty, obviously you'd get far more bigger bubbles and it'd be a lot more fizzy. The fact that they're just plinking on the surface like that, like almost like tench bubbles, and now I know there are no tench in here, straight away I'm thinking that's obviously a much cleaner, harder bottom. So from this point of view, if it was me on my own, I've got 3 spots sorted already and haven't even done half the lake yet. So I wouldn't just jump into it because there's a load of things I might miss somewhere else. But straight away, I know there's probably a harder area out here that they're doing something on. I've seen one out here on the back of this weed, and I've seen some fizzing sort of halfway into this corner, and it just looks spot on for fish to be in that corner. So what I'll do is, because I'm halfway around the lake, I'll call that a day there and we'll start again.